Hi, welcome back to Algebra 2. Today's lesson is 6.4, Solving Quadratics Using Completing the Square. Now we've already solved quadratics using factoring. We've talked about solving it using the quadratic formula, which we will hit again later on in this unit. And now we're going to talk about solving it using completing the square. On occasion, a question might be specific and say, solve by this method. All right, always remember that, solving it in any method will still gain you points. So if by chance you don't remember how to do it by completing the square, you can always solve it using the quadratic formula. As long as it's done completely correct, you will get partial credit. All right, but just understand that if it's not done correctly and you make another mistake within it, then that's a problem. And remember, most of these can be checked by using our calculator, even if they're not perfect numbers. We can get an idea of where they lie. And we'll talk about that some more when we start when we start using the quadratic formula. So the first box at the top kind of gives you a little bit of an example of how this all works. So remember, a must be equal to 1. So if it's not equal to 1, you need to solve it. Here, take half of the coefficient of b and square it. That's what we did here, the 6 over 3. And then we come down here a little bit. It says create a factor of perfect square, which we do. Now, this is the whole new part. So at this point, all the way up to 6, you know how to do this. And hopefully you're really good at it. So this is the only new part. Now you have x minus 3 squared equals 7. How do you undo a square? You take the square root of both sides. I'm going to remind you, because we haven't done this very much, it's positive and negative when you square the square root. In other words, what you're saying to yourself is what number squared is going to give you this number. And remember, that can be a positive or a negative rad 7. So when you end up getting this, you get 3 plus and minus rad 7, which also looks a lot like when you get answers using the quadratic formula. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of these examples over here at exercise 1. And this is all we have to do today. So let's use the completing the square to solve these. So we're going to use the same format that we did before. Now this has an equal sign. So if you choose to do it the way that I'm going to do it now, you can keep everything on the same side of the equal sign and then set it equal at the end. It's completely up to you. But if you're solving this, sometimes keeping them separate, they're not asking us for a vertex this time. So let's use a darker color. So we have x squared plus 6x plus 8. I'm going to leave, okay, equals 0. Now in this case, it might be easier to move the 8 to the other side. So we have x squared plus 6x is equal to negative 8, because we're solving this. Take half of 6 and square it. So half of 6 is 3. Squared is 9. Now this is where I'm talking about. If you're on different sides of the equal sign, instead of subtracting 9, we're going to add 9 to both sides. Sorry for the interruption. So now we square this, and this becomes x plus 3, because half of 6 is 3. Squared is equal to 1. So remember what we have. I'm sorry. It's equal to 1. Take the square root of both sides. This is where it changes. So take the square root of both sides, and we get x plus 3 is equal to positive and negative 1. Some people prefer to split it up. X plus 3 is equal to 1. X plus 3 is equal to negative 1. So we have x is equal to negative 2, or x is equal to negative 4. You don't have to necessarily check them, because most of the time we do not have extraneous roots when we talk about quadratics. So let's take a look now at B. If you're done with that, if you're not done, pause it and then come back to B. So I have x squared plus 12x is equal to negative 23. Move it to the other side right away. Take half of 12 and square it, which is 6, which is positive 36, which I'm going to add to both sides. So I have x plus 6 squared is equal to negative 23 plus 36. 13. Make sure my math is right. Yep. Now we're going to take this. Now we're going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 6 is equal to plus and minus 13. Now some people might want to do this, minus 6, minus 6. So my answer is x is equal to negative 6 plus and minus 13. So it's going to equal negative 6 plus 13, which is 7. And we have negative 6 minus 13, which is negative 19. So far, so good. Of course, C is going to come up and totally screw us up because we have a leading coefficient that's not 1 here. Alrighty, so first step. This is equal to 42, so that's kind of nice. It's already on the other side of the equal sign. So the first thing I guess I'm going to do is factor out an 8 and get x squared plus 2x. Well, the nice thing, at least I'm not getting fractions here, equals 42. So now take half of 2 and square it, and we get 1. But remember, it's going to be 8 times 1, so we're really adding 8 to the left side, so we have to add 8 to the right side. So we get 8 times x plus 1 squared is equal to 50. Isolate the squared. I mean, you can square both sides at this point because you can just get the 64 out front. But I think it's just easier to divide out the 8 first. So I get x plus 1 squared is equal to 50 over 8, which reduces to 25 over 4, which is nice because now when we take the square root of both sides, we have perfect squares. So we're going to have x plus 1 is equal to the square root of 25 over 4 is plus and minus 5 over 2, minus 1 from both sides. And we get x is equal to negative 1, so we write it like this, plus and minus 5 over 2. So we get negative 1 plus 5 over 2. Now this is the same thing as negative 2 over 2 plus 5 over 2. So this is equal to 3 over 2 on this side. And then we have negative 1 minus 5 over 2. This is, again, negative 2 over 2 minus 5 over 2. This is if you don't have calculator and doing it in your head. You're doing it by hand. So this becomes negative 7 over 2. So these are my answers. Positive 3 over 2 and negative 7 over 2. My advice is always double check it in your calculator. When I trust my head, that's when I make mistakes. Okay, moving up to D. We have x squared minus 10x plus 26 equals 8. So this one, determine where you want your constant to be, either the right or the left. If we're solving, like I said, I usually tend to like it on the left. So minus 26 from both sides, and I get x squared minus 10x is equal to negative I'm sorry, I have negative 18, so that's not right. So 8 minus 26 is 2 is 18. So negative, oh, that's where the negative 18 comes from. Okay, so that's where the negative 18 comes from. So now I'm going to get x squared minus 10x, take half and square it. So plus 25 equals negative 18 plus 25. Don't have to multiply it, leading coefficient is 1 this time. So I get x minus 5 squared is equal to negative 18 plus 25 is a positive 7. Square root both sides. And we get x minus 5 is equal to plus and minus rad 7. So my answer is going to be x is equal to 5 plus and minus rad 7. Now, if it tells you to leave it in simplest radical form, that's the way you're going to leave it. All right, so now, does this one give us those directions at all? It doesn't. But if it did, if this was the answer, it would either tell you one of two things. Leave your answer in simplest radical form, or round it to the nearest tenth, nearest hundredth, whichever way. All right. If the question does not ask you to leave it in simplest radical form, and this is what you get, I would question it, especially on a Regents exam or on one of my tests, because I will be specific to say that. All right. But that is the answer, by the way. So the independent practice is just 6 problems. So if I haven't told you to do it, you might want to, while it's kind of fresh in your head, you might want to go and try a few of them just to help you out. I'm just going to warn you that number 2 turns out to be fractions. Number 3 and number 5 are both radicals, and let's leave it in simplest radical form. All right? So until next time, 11 minutes, made it pretty fast. All right? If you need to rewatch it or pause it, or, I know I do these kind of fast, but it is my expectation that you're going to watch me do it, you're going to write it down, and if you need to watch it again, then watch it again. All right? Because that's the beautiful thing about having these videos, is that you can always rewind it. And again, if there's a question you have while you're watching it and you just don't know where something comes from, that's where a post-it note comes in, and you put a post-it note on there and I say, I need to know where this comes from, and you ask during class, and I am more than happy to answer those questions. Okay, so until next time, as I always say, make good choices.